we're talking about converting other settings to Savage Worlds, how to keep the feel of a setting in the Savage World system. So if you have played any other game, any other setting, maybe you've played Call of Cthulhu or Warhammer 40K, or you've played some other tabletop role-playing game and you like the setting, but you want to use the Savage World systems, how do you go about doing that and ensuring that you have the right edges and hindrances to kind of keep that feel? Well, today we are joined by Kristian Serrano of the Immaterial Plane. He has written a book converting Eberron to Savage Worlds. This is a really nice, it's a thinner book, but that's fine. And then we'll explain why in a bit. But it's a really great resource if you want to play the world of Eberron in the Savage Worlds setting. There's actually a podcast I listened to for a while. It was an actual play podcast where they played Savage Eberron. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Eberron. If you've played D&D 3.5, 4th, 5th edition, you're probably familiar with Eberron. I know it's one of our favorite settings back when we played D&D. My group loves it. So I guess, yeah. So welcome, Kristian. And sorry for that kind of a little bit of a long intro.
No. It's all good.
First, tell us about if you don't mind, kind of like starting with like, why did you decide to convert Eberron to Savage Worlds? What was your inspiration for that?
Well, I ran Eberron originally in 3.5 edition D&D. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. There were a lot of themes and concepts that I think it was trying to surface for D&D games that previously, I guess, neglected. Like the whole noir and pulp action cinematic feel, that wasn't really present in a lot of D&D at the time. But in my personal life, I got to a point where I had less free time. And I had moved from Florida to Atlanta, Georgia, and I was trying to get another group going. I didn't really have, it was hard for them to get into it because they all had families and jobs and things like that.
I think a lot of us understand that problem a lot.
Yeah, right. And then so I was introduced to Savage Worlds. And when I first read the Explorers edition of Savage Worlds, this is before Deluxe, I felt like my brain just went on fire because I was like, oh my God, this is literally everything I've been trying to execute running an Eberron campaign. Like with the, that cinematic feel. Mm-hmm. And the Eberron brought in they brought in things like action points and whatnot. And that was supposed to try to evoke that, but it didn't, I felt like it always fell flat. When you're rolling a D20 for, a DC and you roll an additional D6 and you might get an additional 1 to your roll and you're like, okay, well, that didn't do anything. Doesn't quite get that feel across. But when I started reading about bennies, started reading about the wild die and all these kinds of things, getting rerolls and all those things, I was like, this is significantly far more empowering for players. And you can just do a lot more. Even just being able to move, attack, and move. You couldn't do that in D&D 3.5 at the time without needing 3 feats and being 4th, 5th level or something like that. So it just felt like Savage Worlds really did a good job of empowering players to be those cool characters that they see in films, that they read about in books, the kind of stuff that fuels Eberron type stories. And so, sure. So that was my inspiration. So I was like, okay, I want to, this feels right. I feel like this would let me run, play, and experience the types of stories in Eberron that I've always been trying to sort of draw from my D&D games. And that's when it started. That's when I was like, okay, well, how can I do this? How do I run Eberron with Savage Worlds? From there, I just started, really looking at a lot of existing content that was already out there and trying to see examples of what they were doing and what kind of feel they were trying to convey and just drawing from that. And that was around 2008 when that started, 2008, 2009. And then I started posting on the forums at the time, some of my ideas and the conversions. I was getting a lot of feedback. I was looking at what other people had done. I saw there were a couple small things out there that people had started with, and I used that as sort of an initial foundation, but long since has been revised well past whatever those things offer.
Right, because that's 14 years then?
Yeah.
More, I guess more like 16 years that you've been doing this thing. Right. Specifically of converting Eberron to Savage Worlds. I mean, this latest one is converted specifically for SWADE now. Yeah. So I did Explorers Edition, Deluxe, and then now SWADE. And the SWADE version is sort of, for me, the definitive
the final one, right? That's why I did did the actual book for it, and as a licensee and so on. And so the idea was that, okay, I've been tinkering with this long enough, with a living Google Doc. Let me put it in stone, so to speak. Yeah, I'll put out a errata probably every now and then, but this is going to be it, And so yeah, that's the culmination. That book is the culmination of all those years of all that work.
Kind of talking about this book real quick before we kind of look too much further into some of the other questions I want to have about it. I want to explain what this book is. I don't know, maybe you have a better pitch than I do about like what this book is and what this book isn't.
Yes. So what it is, it's basically a collection of converted stats, so to speak, like, for the ancestries. For some edges or feats have been adapted to edges, but some of them are reinterpreted or new things altogether. Setting rule recommendations to use to, really get different versions of play out of Eberron. Because Eberron, it has dials, right, that you can do.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, like, depending on where you're at and what you're doing, you even in one setting, you could have different feels for that, what kind of game you're running in that one setting.
Right. It can go from pulp action to noir intrigue to horror, really depending on the story that you're trying to tell. So all those setting rules, the recommendations that are there, there's some that are baseline, like you should absolutely use these. And then others are like recommendations. And then I introduce, I think, like one new one, like I'm drawing a blank on what it is, but yeah,
this is why I have the book right here.
Oh, great. Yeah. Actually, I do too. I should look.
Oh, everyone has a past one?
Yeah. Right. So you're getting a I think that's the background.
Yeah, free background or professional edge.
Which I drew inspiration from that from, I think Pathfinder does the same thing, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, they give you a free class edge.
Free class edge, that's right. Yeah. Or background, I think, as well. And so I think, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And
No, I know takes the background. Everyone takes the class edge.
Right. Yeah. So what it isn't, it doesn't present any of the lore. So part of how I got permission to do this from Wizards of the Coast was that it's based off of the fan content policy. So there's several strict rules within that, I have to follow for that. One, it can't be a full game, right? Like it's just notes. And to be clear, Wizards of the Coast actually went through my Google Doc. They looked at it. They're like, okay, this is just conversion notes. You're not, presenting a full game. This is fine. You're not breaking their IP. Right. So they vetted it and, went through it and whatnot. So it's just the conversion notes. There's no lore. It is dependent on using an official source book for Eberron. So whether it's the Eberron campaign setting, the Rising from the Lost War for 5th ed, or even one of my favorites in actuality. I got it right here.
It's the 4th edition one, isn't it?
No, it's actually, this came before 4th edition, and it's the Adventurer's Guide. And this book is nothing but lore, and it's short snippets. It's basically like a coffee table book. And it's short snippets of just information, little bites to give you the gist of what all the different themes and concepts and whatnot, the elements of Eberron, the races and so on, the 5 nations, blah, blah, blah. Great introduction to Eberron. If you need something that's light and you want to introduce new players, I highly recommend Adventurer's Guide to Eberron. It's available on DM's Guild. You can get print on demand and so on. And so, yeah, you have to have some sort of official source book for it. And the other thing is that it has to be free, which it is. It's available in a Google Doc. You can, save a copy. You can, copy it as a Google Doc itself. You can print a PDF. You can do whatever you want with it. It's there for you to use. It's there for anybody to copy it and do whatever they want with it. The reason why I released it as a licensee, as an ACE licensee for Savage Worlds, was so that I can accept monetary compensation, which the fan content policy allows in the form of either donations or ad revenue or whatever. And so buying the PDF or buying the PDF is a form of donation. You don't have to have the PDF. You can just use the Google Doc if you want.
Yep. The PDF is just pretty.
Right. It's pretty. And it does include a foreword from Keith Baker. So
yeah. For those who don't know, Keith Baker he's
the creator, the creator of Eberron, one of several designers of Eberron as well. So he worked with Bill Slavicsek, Chris Perkins, James Wyatt to produce the original book.
Fairly big name in the tabletop role playing industry because of his role in creating Eberron.
Absolutely.
Which means that's a pretty big deal in my opinion.
Yeah, he and I are good friends. We did Manifest Zone together for several years. We still keep in touch. And then the book is available as well. You can either get it at cost, so you print on demand through Ingram Spark, or you can donate a little bit extra or however much extra to to compensate if you want to, but it's not required. You can just buy yourself an at cost print copy if you'd like. Those are the things that I had to follow in order to accomplish this.
And so the big thing is, again, like if you're wanting to do it, if you know Eberron lore already, you don't necessarily need anything else but the book, because if you know the lore, you get the lore.
Right, exactly.
But John speaking, what I recommend is like this or something like what Kristian mentioned, or even just the Eberron Wikipedia page has so much lore there as well.
Yeah. So there's a fan wiki. There's also a really great supplement on DM's Guild called Eberronicon. And if you haven't seen it, it's really great. It's a small PDF. Well, I say small, but it also has snippets of lore and references to where you can learn more about those topics. And so it's a really great resource. So if you're looking up something about a particular culture or whatever, you can go check it out in Eberronicon. It'll give you references, what book, what article, whatever it is, website that has more information about it.
So it's almost like a mini encyclopedia that references you out to other resources.
Exactly. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a good book. I use it. I mean, it's solid.
So, and it's like I said, I've seen people use this book for actual plays. They've used the resource for actual plays, and I've heard a lot of good things about this. And one of the things that I think that's nice about Savage Worlds is that you pretty much search almost any setting, and this is kind of like going almost against the topic of it today, but you search almost any setting, and you're going to find someone's version of like savaging it. I think Fallout has like 3 different people who have tried doing Fallout.
Yes.
Somebody from France did Borderlands in Savage Worlds.
There's Iron Kingdoms is out there. That's an ongoing project that I've seen. Really good, by the way, if you're into that setting. Yeah,
there's a lot of cool stuff out there so it's like if you before you get too far, just search it to see if it exists, and then we'll go from there. But let's say you have a setting you want converted, and you can't find anything out there already. How could we go about it? Let's kind of dive into those questions and kind of see like what your thoughts were on how you kind of went about making converting Eberron to Savage Worlds. What would you say would be the core things about Eberron that you really wanted to make sure got preserved? I mean, I think you kind of talked about this a little bit already when you talked about different game styles and stuff. But what were like the pulp feeling? But what were like the specific things you really want to make sure kind of got preserved in the feeling of Eberron when you convert it to Savage Worlds?
Yeah, well, and first and foremost, the ancestries, the races, they're very quintessential to what Eberron introduces, what it brings that's new, and as well as the dragon marks. That's another big component of it. And for the ancestries, Warforged is obviously huge, playing something that's a living construct. They're not robots, contrary to popular belief, but they're living constructs. They're robot-like, but they're not like, beep, boop, beep type, robots. They have souls, and they're made out of organic matter as well as inorganic matter, but mostly like wood and like living wood and stone and metal and things like that. So yeah, and so for Warforged, for example, one of the themes was the fact that these are living weapons, right? And they're remnants of a war, and they're looking for a place in a world that doesn't want to see them, that once even regarded them as property, and now they're free, but nobody really wants them. Nobody really wants them around. So trying to find their place in the world and in dealing with some of those biases culturally, I think is what I really try to focus on. And of course, the physical, characteristics of being a living construct. And then shifters with the whole, being, beings of sort of a primal, animalistic nature, and having these physical characteristics that they can bring forth, whether it's for defense, attack, moving quickly, whatever it might be. And then changelings, for me, changelings are just, they're people who adopt multiple identities. They can, their identities are very fluid. They can quickly and easily change the way they look. Not their clothing, of course. You know, they're not. It's not a magical ability per se, but it is a special ability that they have. And then the Kalistrar being psionic, like they are the quintessential psionic beings in Eberron, and you know, capturing that and designing the ancestry in a way that really reflects that, you know, that brings that and shines a light on it. The edges and such, I wanted to focus on those that emphasized the aspects of those different ancestries, but also emphasize the themes of Eberron. The concepts, the character concepts, the action themes, the story themes, those kinds of things. And so that's what I try to focus on. Now, I did make the mistake early on of like looking at all the feats and thinking, oh, I'll just convert these to edges, right? And looking at all the class abilities and like, oh, I'll just convert these to edges. It's an honest mistake. Yeah.
Was it too powerful, or?
It's too much and unnecessary, because I also saw that there was a lot that was already covered, not just by existing edges, but just by existing combat options. You know, that just you can just do.
You can always do that. You don't need an edge to do that.
Right, exactly. I learned to avoid the redundancies and things like that with the conversions. And yeah, there's just a lot of feats that, like I said, you can just do that. You know, you don't need a feat for that per se, or an edge. And
you're saying ancestries is a really important part. I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but the ancestries in the book are at a +4 instead of a +2, which is the usual.
Yeah.
What was the and for those who don't know, in Savage Worlds, you can create your own races using a point system, and the races in most of the books that Pinnacle produces are at a let's call it +2. I mean, they have like +2 in power versus hindrances detract. But yours are at +4. Pathfinders are also at +4. There's a lot of other settings that do +4. Or I've seen like, I think one was like a +6. What was your reason for deciding to go with both a +4 versus like the usual, I'm in air quotes, usual +2?
I have tried it at +2, and it's doable, but you sacrifice a lot in terms of, you know, some of the nuances that define the characters in terms of their benefits, but you kind of have to pile on an excess amount of hindrances to counterbalance.
Sure.
There's only so many hindrances or negative abilities that you can do without it sounding repetitive. +4, I switched back to, I originally did +4, then I did +2, I think, and then I went back to +4, I think. God, it's been so many years.
Sure. Let's just say,
yeah. So anyway, I finally landed on +4. And what that allowed was to really flesh out the nuances of the ancestries and their abilities, and let them shine the way they're supposed to shine with those abilities. You know, not having to rely on so many negative abilities to try to balance it, right? I can just, do a couple here and there. And then, like I said, let the ancestries shine for what they're good at, and what they're supposed to do. Like, changelings, they change their appearance. That's what they should do, period. It's like breathing air for them, right? Let's let them do that.
So ancestry is very important to you. Personally, when I think of Eberron, and when I talk to like one of my friends, the reason why he loves Eberron is because whenever he thinks about magic systems or places that have magic, he's always, like in our Forgotten Realms game, they're always trying to figure out a way to kind of like mass produce magic or right. industrialize magic. And in Eberron, you kind of do that. Like in Eberron, magic is industrialized. It's used to power everything. Yeah. You just replace electricity with magic, and that's basically what you got. How do you feel like you handled doing that in Savage Worlds, in like creating edges and hindrances, or in like, or is the things you just didn't deal with, you didn't have to deal with?
Yeah. So, in 3.5, the world of Eberron is very much designed and built based on assumptions of 3rd edition, right? Like, and the idea is that magic is repeatable, it's observable, it's teachable, etc. And, and very formulaic in terms of magic item creation rules. Like it had very strict, specific rules for how to create magic items. So it made sense in the setting to have that. They kind of hand wave that a little bit more in 5th edition. They don't really get too specific with it, which is fine in my opinion. For Savage Worlds, I try to look at existing things, like, for example, the weird, before the Fantasy Companion came out, before Savage Pathfinder came out, we just had weird science. That worked well enough for the Artificer. right? You're creating gadgets, but instead of technical gadgets, or technological gadgets, they're magical gadgets. Same thing, right? That trope of the weird scientist is literally what the artificer is supposed to be for pulp stories, for Eberron stories, right? Like it's a direct parallel. Then with SWADE, we had the arcane devices, which was a way to just, you spend an hour, you make a temporary magic item that has power points and, a couple powers or power on it. And that was also very sufficient for just, a basic simple thing. And I just kind of extrapolated from them, like, okay, well, we also have dragon shards, right? That can be like magical source. So what if I create an arcane device and then I used a dragon shard to refuel it with power points, right? Like that's kind of cool. Then, of course, with Savage Pathfinder and the Fantasy Companion, we had some more concrete magic item creation rules. Now, I don't get into how do you make an airship, or how do they make the lightning rail, or, those kinds of things. I do touch on, like, how do they bind an elemental, right? There's rules for that. We have rules for that. And the Horror Companion even expands on that some. And it looks like the second wave of Savage Pathfinder. So they're
Advanced Barriers Guide 2.
Right. So that's going to have more of that. But the way I look at it is, when I watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, or if I watch, The Last Crusade, and they're on a Zeppelin, I don't care about how that Zeppelin was made, right? I don't think about the cost or the materials or whatever that's involved. My concern is, how is he getting from point A to point B, and what happens on that set, right? Like that's all I care about story-wise. Yes, I love the idea of this, widespread low-level magic and these technologies that exist. Caveat, by the way, this is a point, an important distinction in Eberron. Airships are not ubiquitous. They're not all over the place. They're actually still relatively rare. And seeing an airship is still supposed to be like, wow, look at that thing, right? So a lot of people think
they become a little bit too ubiquitous, because every player,
right? Yeah, and
wants to ride.
Everybody thinks there's just like fleets of airships flying through the sky, and it's not like that at all. Like there's not that many airships out there. There's as many as the plot needs. We'll say that. So when I'm running a game, or if I'm playing in an Eberron game, I don't think about, like, I don't have to worry about, like, how much does it cost to make an airship, or what kind of powers do I have to cast in order to build one. And it's like,
that's not the story.
It's not the story. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So story, like you said, story is like kind of what we're here for, right? That's like kind of, if I wanted to do a simulator, I'd go launch some simulator on my computer, and I do that. But if we're looking for story, Eberron has some pretty deep story within it, without too much though.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think Keith has talked about how he purposely only wants there to be so much story but leave gaps in the story so that you can insert your own elements to kind of do your own thing.
Right.
How much of that, or how much, if any, of the kind of the story elements, because obviously the book, this conversion is just conversion notes, it's not lore, but how much of that necessarily comes into other factors of the conversion notes? Like, how much does story factor into converting things from D&D to Savage Worlds?
The answer I give for that is it's about themes. What is the theme that a Kalashtar represents, right? What is the theme that playing a Kalashtar is supposed to evoke, and so on. When I'm playing an inquisitive, right, and an investigator, basically, what are the themes and tropes that I want to be able to play to, or that I want to express from the setting and, to the table, right, or to the story? That's kind of what I focused on. Like, even doing the two-fisted action stuff, what are the edges, or powers or things like that are going to allow me to do those kinds of things, to be that kind of a hero in the story. And that's what I focused on, was what'll basically empower players and GMs to tell the story that they want to tell in an Eberron setting.
So when I think of themes, I often think about setting rules, and we kind of talked about that, about setting rules briefly.
Setting rules are a great way to surface themes. Excellent way to surface themes. Absolutely.
Yeah. So every time I talk to someone about, not every time, but like if I talk about someone who's interested in running Savage Worlds as a GM, my sister-in-law wants to start a new game. She has a setting in mind already that she ran in 5th edition. She wants to do it again. but because she wants less combat.
Yeah.
And most of us have played Savage Worlds now. We've kind of convinced her to do Savage Worlds instead. And a lot of questions I've started by asking her is just like, okay, you want to do, I think I was going to walk her through some setting rules, but instead she just kind of, she took the books and just started reading through them herself and just kind of like notating the ones that like, oh, this would be really cool.
Yeah.
This is a good rule to have for my setting. Hers, she wants more like political intrigue and stuff. So like the betrayal setting rule is like one that she's planning on using, and that's stuff like that.
That's kind of a cool thing about setting rules, because I have the same feeling, and that's when you know a system's doing its job well. When you're looking through those setting rules and you're like, oh, that would be perfect for this setting, or that would be perfect for the story. That's exciting, right? Then, and that gets you motivated, and you're like, I want to see that in play. You know, I want to experience that. And I think that's Savage Worlds really did a good job with that. They really nailed it with the setting rules for that.
It doesn't even have to be like a setting rule per se. Like a game that I would like to run one day, is where like a setting where everyone has magic, but not necessarily everyone's that strong at it. Maybe like they're very weak at it. Yeah. But some people are really, really powerful at it. But everyone has like some level of magic.
Right. Right.
And so my plan for that game is that everyone starts with the gifted background edge from the core rulebook.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, everyone starts with this. Like and then because of the theme I'm going for, where people try to encourage, since everyone's trying to use magic, to try and encourage not using armor, using the unarmored hero setting rule.
Yes.
So you just looking through all this kind of things so that you can really kind of evoke the feeling that you want.
Yeah, and one of the things I did in the book too that I kind of wish more settings did this. I put the setting rules at the front of the book. Usually they come after, like, the character creation stuff and all the edges and hindrances. And the reason why I put it at the front of the book is because I've always felt that the setting rules help inform character creation, right? Like if you know what things are going to come into play during this game, then that might inform the design of the character, right? And that was the reason why I did that.
I think that might be something that maybe has changed a bit, mostly with since SWADE. I think more and more are doing setting rules at the beginning. I think
the official stuff from PEG, they still put it later. I don't know. I haven't really looked at a lot of what third-party publishers, the ACE licensees have been doing. But I think
I'm tempted now to go to my next room and grab a book off the shelf.
But if they are, if they are doing that, I think that's the right way to do it, in my opinion.
No, I would agree. I haven't put a lot of thought into it.
It also puts emphasis on the themes and the tone of the setting as well. Like what you're getting into.
And that might be it. It might be since I know that setting rules matter, I might just be opening up a book and just going, okay,
what are the setting rules?
Just I might just be flipping straight to the setting rules without thinking about the order of the book, because I'm always interested in seeing what cool setting rules other people have come up with. Right. So if it's a third party product, it's that's not Pinnacle. Yeah. Maybe Pinnacle does some setting rules. I'm like, what's the cool thing that you guys did for this one that's interesting and stuff. Yeah. And then going from there to the edges, and then from there to usually the hindrances first and then the edges. Right. Arcane. If there's an arcane background option, I like to read those first. So I'm just curious to see what's the cool arcane background you came up with for your setting?
Right. I do the same thing.
So when you're doing your adaptation, what were, you kind of talked about some of your hurdles that you had early on with converting feats to edges. What were some other kind of hurdles and challenges you faced when trying to do the conversion? What were some things that were difficult for you?
Well, like I said, magic items were kind of still weird, because there was an old fantasy toolkit that touched on it, and that was okay. It did a decent job. And then the original fantasy companion still pulled from that in terms of all the tables and the cost to create magic items, and I use that. I like more how the current fantasy companion does it, and Savage Pathfinder does it.
Yeah, Savage Pathfinder did a lot to kind of kickstart that.
Yeah, Savage Pathfinder, honestly, what they did with that, I wish I could have done for Eberron. It's so good. And, just having all that, literally that direct translation of all these third edition era crunchy bits brought over to Savage Worlds. I was jealous.
Yeah, because because the Pathfinder for Savage Worlds is, they say this explicitly. Yeah, it's explicitly based on the 3.5 or the first edition of Pathfinder, which is basically 3.75.
Right, exactly. The other hurdles, really wrestling with trying to design arcane backgrounds in a way that they felt worth it and different and unique. The ancestries, I have gone round and round and round. With Warforged, I can't even tell you how many iterations I've done of Warforged, because they're really hard to pin down, especially when you're playing with how many points, right? You know,
right. So the living construct itself gives like a whole bunch of points that you have to like deal with.
Yeah, and constructs, even the cost of constructs alone have shifted. So trying to like balance against that, and you know, you start with construct, take away, add some. It was a lot. Speaking to the do's and don'ts of conversion, what I realized with Warforged in particular, and with others as well, but with Warforged, there were a lot of traits in the original 3.5 version that were really just about D&D-isms. They were about managing the rules of that edition of D&D within that race. And I realized that, you know, after a while, I'm like, I don't need to deal with this particular feature. That's just because of rules regarding like armor or whatever, you know.
These only exist because it's the way the system of D&D works.
Exactly. And so that speaks to some of the traps that you can fall into when you're converting a setting from one system to another. It's important to look at what's important for the theme of the character concept versus what's important because that's how the mechanics for that system worked. I'm a web designer, right? So I look at other websites sometimes, you know, try to get inspiration. A lot of the, you know, stakeholders, when I do designs for them, they look at other websites, you know, oh, I like this, I like that. And I have to stop and think, why did they make that design choice? What problem did they have that they were trying to solve? And, you know, what constraints maybe in their CMS, for example, their content management system that they have that they couldn't do this thing, so they did it that way, you know, things like that. And so I do the same thing when I think about looking at settings from one system to another. Why did they do that in that design for that system? Oh, it's because that's how that game handles that thing. Well, if we don't have to worry about that, then really all I need to worry about with Warforged is their constructs that are alive. They, you know, still feel pain. They have emotions and they need a place in the world and people don't like them. And, you know, and of course they have like, you know, benefits of being a construct, you know, in terms of armor. That's really what I had to retrain myself to think about as I went through the years of many iterations.
Has there been anything where you felt like you took some, I'll say, creative liberties with changes you made?
Yeah.
Where like, this is definitely maybe not the way it was intended.
Yeah. Like deviating a little bit from.
Yeah. So like one thing I saw that I don't know if maybe it exists in 3.5 or 4 or something. I don't think it exists in 5e. Was your hybrid shifter ability?
Oh, right.
Where you have two different ancestors, you have like two ancestries for a shifter as an edge.
So ironically, that was actually a feat in 3.5. And
okay, so it did exist. Okay.
Yeah. So the reason why, you know, there's some feats that I was like, yeah, I want to convert that feat because that's a cool ability, right? Like, why not? Like, why not have, you know, if I could do it there, you know, that wasn't a D&D-ism. That was you're a shifter who has a blend of two different heritages, right?
Yeah,
two different things.
100%.
And so it was like, I'm like, that should exist in Savage World as well. So I'm going to create that. Why not? Right?
It's definitely balanced. It's just another edge.
Right.
So it's just getting their person's abilities as your edge.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right. So that's where that came out of. And as far as liberties, you know, Dragon Marks, I played around with in various iterations. There were an arcane background at one point. I really liked the way Mystic Powers worked in SWADE with Pathfinder for Savage Worlds and the Fantasy Companion. And to me, that's really more of how Dragon Marks should be. At first with SWADE, I did it as an arcane background. And then, because you could do multiple arcane backgrounds in SWADE. And then somebody made an argument where it's like, well, they shouldn't have to roll. They should just be able to just do it. Right. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, Mystic.
Spend the PowerPoints, do it. Right.
Exactly. And the PowerPoint pool, of course, limits, you know, based on, because they could do these things, you know, so many times per day in 3.5. There were spell-like abilities, you know, once, twice per day. And I figured, you know, PowerPoint's kind of simulated that to some extent.
It's been 16 years of doing this. How has the you're pretty much at this point become a pinnacle in the community because everyone knows about it.
Not the Pinnacle Entertainment Group. That's, you know.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right.
A pillar of the community. You know, so it's pillar.
Thank you.
You're going to become a pillar of the community. How has over the years, how has the community kind of responded to it?
It's been surreal in a lot of ways, only because, like, to me, it's still a pet project. And so whenever somebody like kind of praises it or talks about it, I'm like, I still feel like, I don't know, like
a little bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. You know, and you know, Keith really thought it was real well done. And, you know, several Clint and Jody, you know, we've chatted, and, you know, actually they play in a game, in a Savage Eberron game with me and Jen. And so to me, it just feels this, I just like this, and it's I just like doing it. And so it's like I said, it's weird when people tell me like, oh, this is why I came to Savage Worlds, or, you know, this changed the way I, you know, play whatever, blah, blah, blah. And, you know,
what's something we have not covered and that you want to give like out as advice, or do you want to like summarize the advice that you have for, when people come to Savage Worlds with a setting that they want to put into, you know, to convert?
Yeah.
Whether it be an existing tabletop role-playing setting, or a book, or a book series or a movie series or whatever that they want to convert into Savage Worlds, what is the thing that you would kind of encourage them to kind of consider when doing that conversion?
You know, take some time to meditate on what, you know, what is it about those stories that you like, that drew you to them, and that make you want to play in that world, and make that the focal point around which you design the conversion or the you know, the mechanics. If it's not
the adaptation,
right, the adaptation, make that the focal point. Like, for example, Avatar: The Last Airbender, everybody is like, oh, I would do it this way with these mechanics and blah blah blah. It's like, okay, but what are the important themes of that story as well? The mechanics can kind of work themselves out, you know, like, but really think about like, what is it that you want a player to be able to do in the story and with their character? Start from that, and then, you know, kind of work your way out. I think that's probably it. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Convert all the feats and whatever, and, you know, class abilities, and you know, tinker, right? You're probably going to do that. You're probably going to go through several iterations. It's very different to do that for your personal campaign than it is to try to do it as a published product. As a personal campaign, just go crazy and see what works, see what doesn't. Don't be afraid to change it. Don't be afraid to talk through it with your players.
I say don't be worried about balance.
Yeah, don't worry about balance. It'll figure its way out. And Savage Worlds is pretty loose with regards to balance anyway. You know,
I think it's one of the things that a lot of new players, Savage Worlds, kind of have a hard time understanding, is that like they go, how do I balance my encounters? It's like you don't. If you're in front of a giant dragon, you don't fight it. You run, or you find another way to defeat it or circumvent it, or, you know, whatever. You're not going to only run into the things that you can kill successfully by depleting 3/4 of your. None of my players, I'll throw a dragon at them, they'll kill it anyways, and then they're novice.
One shot, yeah. That's great. That's the story you want to tell anyway, right? Bard did it, you know, in The Hobbit. So if you are running something for players from another system, make sure it's important that they understand not to try to play that other game using Savage Worlds. Play in the world using Savage Worlds. Don't use Savage Worlds to emulate the other game. That's not the point. The point is to focus on the stories that you want to tell, and using Savage Worlds mechanics to tell those stories.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add on one other thing. Is I think some people try to like convert. They hear the word convert, and this is why I prefer the word adapt.
Yes.
Then convert. I know I used a lot of the word convert, but convert's the word that people usually use, even though adapt's the more accurate one.
Right.
But often when people try to adapt or convert, they are often like literally trying to like take this ability score from D&D and make it this attribute in Savage Worlds, and like they're trying to like by the numbers exacts.
Right.
And it's like they're two different systems.
Yeah.
Like they don't you can't do that.
I mean, there's certain things that are approximations, like, you know, like when you're talking about like a strength score and a dexterity versus agility, you can approximate, you know, it's pretty much kind of a similar track. But as far as like, you know, well, as a warlock, I could do this very specific thing, you know, with this in this many number of times with this much power or whatever it might be. It's like, okay, but a warlock thematically is really about somebody who has magic because they made a pact with some entity, right? Like that's really the core of it. If you have Bolt as one of your powers, that's your Eldritch Blast. Go from there, you know, and you know, if you want to tweak some things for that, you know, again, Fantasy Companion is a great source for examples for that kind of thing. You know, yeah, go for that, but don't worry about those very hyper specific, you know, features from specific classes or whatever. If you want to learn more about Eberron, there's all the episodes of Manifest Zone are still out there. They're on our website. You get to hear me, Keith, Wayne, Imogen, and Scott W. talk about Eberron for several years.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Kristian. Thanks, everybody. If you're interested in this book, go ahead and look at the link down below if you want to go ahead and grab a copy. Well, thanks, everyone, and everyone have a great day and enjoy your evening. See you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.